Okay, so this is going to be a rant that was requested last week in our Monday Magic Mood Boost. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you're here. So the question was, why is there so much confusion about which books are in the Bible, which books are not in the Bible? I'm also going to bring in sort of translations of the Bible too, because this really is kind of an interwoven topic. Let me know how that sounds to you guys. I will make sure to draw in what's going on in the chat with what I'm saying as much as I can. So my goal here is to be as grounded as possible. I'm going to stick a heavier stone in my lap because I could go wild with this one. So here's the thing, especially when it comes to the Bible, but not even only the Bible, right? Just a lot the Bible, because there's so much pressure on it. First and foremost, the Bible is a book. It's a book. It's not even really a book. It's an anthology. It's an anthology. Okay, the Bible is an anthology. Can we just let it be an anthology for a second? And then when you allow it to be an anthology, now that'll help open your mind to this. Actually, even for the Student Study of the Modern School of Ancient Wisdom, we are doing an analysis in a couple weeks. Look forward to this, guys, about the criticism of witchcraft in the Bible, what it actually means and what it's actually talking about. And does it actually hate people who do magic? Spoiler, no. So that's for later if you're in the student study, and maybe even later I'll bring it to more of a free forum. But it is an anthology. If you've ever contributed to an anthology, if you've ever read an anthology, you know that the stories in an anthology, are separate from each other. So while some of them may work cohesively together, fantastic, they are not things that were written one after the other by the same person to be a cohesive singular storyline. That is not the Bible whatsoever, actually. The Bible, as we know it, especially, let me backtrack a little bit here. This is important. The Bible isn't even the book of a singular religion or a singular culture. One of the things that's really interesting about Abrahamic religions is that they disagree with each other on very crucial points. Case in point, that this affects all three of them. In the Old Testament, we have the story of Abraham. Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham, right? By the way, yes, Liz, the Bible is actually full of spells as well. The Psalms, many of them, not all of them, many of them were actually Canaanite spells and prayers. And many of the Psalms are just mostly David attributed, complaining about why God abandoned him and saying, like, don't do that anymore. So we also are allowed to question God. It's in the Bible. It's in the Bible a lot. And God changes their mind in the Bible a lot. And God is not even the same God sometimes in the Bible. And yes, the Bible does allow for multiple gods. Those are totally separate rants I could get into, but now you know. So, thank you, Jackie. So, when we get into the story of Father Abraham, I have the song stuck in my head. I'm going to try to get around it. We traditionally know, if you come from either a Jewish or a Christian background, you might think, oh, Abraham and Isaac, right? Abraham had a couple sons, but was supposed to have one with Sarah, did for the longest time, so had one with Hagar, who was another wife of his that Sarah was like, hey, I'm not going to have kids, even though God said I should. So because I'm not going to wait for that, I'm old, you should have one with Hagar so that your line can at least continue, and we'll pretend that's our kid. So Abraham and Hagar have, in our version, Ishmael. And then Sarah gets pregnant with Isaac, starts hating Hagar because jealousy. And from there it says, send Hagar and Ishmael out. And Hagar and Ishmael get sent out into the wilderness. They nearly die, to the point where Hagar is like, hey, I'm going to hide my child in this bush. This is another topic I'm going to get into. The age of Ishmael during this period contradicts itself in the very same Bible that you are reading. So in one, he's like a little kid. In another one, he's already a teenager. When you see him in comparison to Isaac in some of the passages, he's a teenager already. In others, he's still a baby. The Bible does contradict itself. So that's another thing to get into. However, back to the wilderness. In the wilderness, Ishmael starts crying because he's afraid he's going to die. Legit, that can happen. And God hears Ishmael crying, comes to Hagar and says, you know what? We're going to make a nation of him too. Don't worry. You're going to be okay. Saves them. Yeah, that happens. Except if you're in the Islamic culture. Because, and I confirmed this, you guys, when I was with Hani in Egypt, I ran up to him at the Zoser temple and I was like, hey, I read this year in the footnotes of my Bible that in your version of the Bible, Isaac was born first and cast out, and Ishmael was the one that was taken to the top of the mountain and almost sacrificed, but then not sacrificed, and was then the start of Abraham's line, right? Yeah, that's how it is. So I read about it and I confirmed it with someone who is of that belief system and grew up in it and knows it really well. Hani is incredible. So yeah, right? So just to get you started, one of the reasons the books of the Bible are the way they are, and this is more of a translation thing, not even a translation thing, but just a choice, is the narrative, right? People need a narrative to fit what they need their people to believe. Much of the Old Testament of the Bible was actually for the purposes of making sure that the Hebrew people didn't lose faith in their God while they were in exile from Babylon. So all of this stuff that was like, don't worry, this happened and this happened and this happened. They were also taking it into the context to be like, I swear this happened, you guys. Please don't, stop believing in our God. We'll be restored one day. Don't you worry. Like, God hasn't abandoned us. And here's why. God, I hope that's true. And that's the idea. That's what happened. So their scribes had and their priests had to get on it and be like, okay, we need some stories. They're going to keep the people's faith so that they don't, I'm assuming, so that they don't assimilate into a different culture and suddenly be okay with this. That's my assumption. But either way, they needed a narrative, which is why I'm reading right now Second Samuel, or Samuel 2, however you want to say it, which is talking about David and a lot of his conquests post Goliath. And then I'm also reading at the same time, because of the way I set myself up, and boy, is it a lot, Psalms, because some of the Psalms are relating back to this. And also, what's it called? It's about keeping records. I can't remember what the word is right now. But anyway, it's a whole separate book of the Bible that is about, I'm going to remember the word eventually. But anyway, it's a whole separate book that retells it. So if you've ever tried to read the Bible and you get to like son of, son of, son of, son of, son of, and then 2 books later, you get to son of, son of, son of, son of, son of, and then one of those, if you care to stick with it, you'll find that the one of the son ofs is different because they're changing the narrative and they're saying, well, right now I need this to be true. And so it's not Deuteronomy, but thank you, Russ. I don't know. Maybe I'll get there. I had it a second ago and it's one of those things. But so Chronicles, it's Chronicles. So 2 Samuel and Chronicles tell parallel stories. But in 2 Samuel, you're getting like, David slept with Bathsheba and had her husband killed. Whoops. And then in Chronicles, you're getting, we're not going to talk about that because it makes David look bad. And we don't want you to think David was bad. We want you to think David was good because we need you to keep believing in all of this stuff because it's important so you don't abandon the faith. So again, the agenda and the narrative become very important. So I'm going to kind of leave it there because we're already after 11. I'm not going to stop the rant though. We're still going. So translation issues are another thing that happen. Over the years, we have situations where a word in Hebrew or in Greek or even later in Latin don't translate perfectly to something else. This happens across the board. If you want to read more about this, I recommend a book called Portable Magic by Emma Smith. It's not super long, but it's super fascinating. And it even gets into just how the book as a thing was used, even when it wasn't being read. Another thing it gets into, speaking of narratives, right, is the way translation was used for an agenda. When missionary stuff became really popular, especially as they were in the New World, the first Bible translated into a Native American language it also incorporated things that the Native Americans already believed so that they would start believing in the same stuff in the Bible. So that Bible that was translated into their language, which is like, look, we made our book in your language to be inclusive, made up a lot of stuff so that it would make it easier for them to convert. Agendas. It happens a lot. So you got to be really discerning with your translations, not only in biblical stuff, but even in astrological stuff and everything. When there's a translation, there is room for error. And so you want to be as faithful as possible. This is why we have multiple translations of Greek myths as well. I highly recommend, I think her name it's Emily. Emily something, who just recently did the Odyssey and is also now doing the Epic of Gilgamesh. Just remember Emily, she'll show up, really great covers. So agendas, missionary work, translation issues, the patriarchy. You can't forget the patriarchy. For this one, I recommend actually reading Mysteries of the Dark Moon by Dimitri George. It really explains how the matriarchal system got canceled out, and it compares a lot of feminine myths like Pallas and Athena, and it shows you how they were revised and rewritten to fit that same agenda, similar to how the Old Testament was done to say like, hey, we don't want you to lose faith in this. So we're going to rewrite this story a little bit to make it easier for you to keep the faith the way we want you to. And so the same thing, of course, happened with strong female characters, especially even in the Bible. So I need to find really good sources for this one. But there is evidence to suggest that Mary, think Mary Magdalene, and Martha, the two, I believe, I think there was one other person. I think it was like maybe another Mary. Mary and Martha were supposed to be the ones who had found Jesus in the tomb, except there's evidence to suggest that Mary was given such importance in the Bible that they split her into two people to make that one person not as crucial to the story and not get as much credit. This happens across the board in all deity pantheons. The female deities get lowered. In fact, there's only one book in the Old Testament where they're like, this part of Exodus may have been written by a woman, because they actually give women credit for something. They don't know that it was written by women, but because it gives women credit for something, they're like, it might have been. And then you only get like a couple women in the Bible. Most notably, we'll talk about Esther, who is just a very short story, like a slice of life storybook in the Bible, super short, about what the ideal wife would be like. Rude. So anyway, that's more. Emily Wilson is the one who did the translation of the Odyssey. Thank you, Amber. Okay, cool. And then you get into arguments about theology, right? So the Council of Nicaea, which we've all heard about, was presided over by Constantine. Dude, I can't stand Constantine. That's a whole other rant. Constantine bugs the heck out of me. The Council of Nicaea had this guy named Arius. Arius was kind of in his own little team of, I believe his idea was that Jesus was always a God, and like we didn't have to worry about anything else. But there was this argument in the Council of Nicaea of like, is Jesus fully God, or is Jesus partly human, or is Jesus fully human, or is Jesus human until he's on the cross and then he has this moment where he becomes a God and that's why he can like, that's where we got into, right? The theological debates of this then led to a whole religious movement that actually Arius got exiled because everybody hated him so much. And then for some reason, Constantine decided to finally convert to Christianity on his deathbed and had Arius baptize him, which made Arius suddenly popular. And then Arian Christianity, or the perspective of it, became the way to go. And we're still talking about it today. We still don't know if the Eucharist is supposed to actually be the body or not. That was another thing that was considered at these councils. Is this the body of Christ, or is it bread? What was Jesus really talking about? So there's a lot to go into. Then you get into deeper views, because Christianity isn't just Christianity, right? We have your, it's not even just Christianity. Go back to Abrahamic, right? You've got your Jews, the Islamic perspective, the Christian perspective. Among the Christians, there were the Gnostic Christians who were like, by the way, I don't think the Old Testament God is the same as the God throughout. I think that's the demiurge. And I think he's punishing us by existing here. And we need to like supersede our physical limitations and achieve gnosis, wisdom, through, they also were very patriarchal. So they took their wisdom deity, who was also like the Holy Spirit. So they were Trinitarian. And they were like, Sophia made a mistake by trying to create without her masculine counterpart. Ooh. And so that's why all of this exists. We are all a mistake by a God who doesn't realize that they were born of a mistake, because Sophia gave birth to the demiurge, which doesn't realize that it was cast out from actual creation, and so is only able to make imperfect things. Hi, we're imperfect things. So that's where that comes from. Yeah, it's ridiculous, right? And so some of that is like, okay, it's also one of the things that mentions the archons in that are supposed to be the planets. And so astrology is there underneath as well. So are many of the mysticisms and esoteric things. In fact, if you read some of the books of Moses where we talk about Enoch, who was so wise and so close to God that instead of dying, he just continued to walk with God off into the wilderness, disappeared, and never had to die. But also, Enoch's narratives tell about angels giving us things like astrology, alchemy, makeup, and weapons. And so all of a sudden, well, we don't want astrology because that means that our free will is taken away from us. And Jesus took away that limitation. Jesus saved us. We all have free will. Everybody else is trapped, but not us because we got Jesus. So the archons are bad. There were 7 visible planets that were in play, right? They became the 7 deadly sins. But for every sin, they needed a redemption, right? So you got your 7 heavenly virtues to contrast that became angels. And thus did daimones or spirits become demon translations, right? And then we got angels from there, which is messenger, which, by the way, in the Bible, angels are supposed to be just emanations of God in that moment, doing one thing or another. And Satan is just adversary. So sometimes an angel shows up as a Satan in order to make someone deter from the path that they're on, to just knock them off so that they don't do the wrong thing. There it is, right? So much to get into. Wait, the planets were propagandized into the 7 deadly sins. Yeah. It bugs me. Um, and then to get into the books that made it in and the books that didn't, right? So getting really to the root of this question that we started out with, we have the books that made it in and the books that didn't. Some of them, like, we have a bunch that say things that they didn't want people using, right? It didn't go with other things that the church was trying to support. So those books got taken out. Except if you're Catholic, you get to keep the Apocrypha. If you're not Catholic, you don't get the Apocrypha. If you want to read a book of the Bible that is as complete as we can get right now, I recommend the Oxford Annotated Bible. There's a 5th edition. Apparently, there's a new one coming out. I don't know when. So if you want to get started on that, there's also an ebook version. It's a lot cheaper. So the Oxford Annotated Bible is where I got a lot of this information from it, by the way. I read the footnotes and I read the introduction essays, and they're really, really helpful for providing context. If you don't want to read the footnotes and the introduction essays, keep asking me questions because I'm reading them. I'm spending the whole year doing it, and I'm comparing things to each other historically, chronologically. So hopefully that helps as well. So some of these are the reasons. It's not the whole reason, right? But if we break it down, it comes down to, what did they need people to believe? What did their people need in order to keep hope and faith at the time? What did we need people to convert to, and how did we need to control people's narratives? And did we get the translation right? So many of the original books of the Bible, let's not even get into the New Testament, which was written several hundred years after Jesus. So likely none of those people who wrote those books were actual Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Most of it's Paul. Paul was years later. Paul was a tax collector who had a vision of Jesus and suddenly decided, you know what, I can tell you everything you need to know. But he also had his own opinions that got infused into there. So a lot of Christianity today is actually listening to Paul, not necessarily the words of Jesus, but Paul's interpretation of what he said Jesus was telling us to do. That's a mind blow too. So thinking about all of this, again, it's what was the intention behind the words that we're looking into. So I hope this helps. It is 11:11. We'll make a wish, and we'll let me know really quickly, you guys, if this is a container for this. There's a lot that goes into what made it into the Bible, what didn't. Most of it is about the narrative. And in more modern times, there are endeavors being made to sort of sift that out. This is where it seems that theology and religion, which always had a bit of a separate track, they are really kind of going on opposite sides of each other right now, where one is focused on like the spiritual necessity of these things, and the other is, what's the truest thing we can find in here? And also, how does it relate and include and allow for everybody else's perspective too? This is why I'm not really sure if I would, in this context, consider myself more religious than I am theological. So I hope that helps. Yeah. So I hope that helps. I hope that you guys have a really great week. I will not be here next week for our Monday Magic Mood Boost Live, but I will be back on June 2nd and we can get into it. If there's anything else you would like to hear a rant about, I'll research it and I will get back to you and do a rant for that. And I'll even go over time if I have to. So thank you guys so much for hanging in there with me. And it is like opening a box of sparkly things. I hope this week feels like opening a box of sparkly things. Just be really careful around Saturday. There's a lot going on. Take care of yourself. Feel your feelings. Sit with whatever you need to sit with. And I hope in the end it brings you to something incredible. Don't worry. There's really good things coming up in the astrology in the next couple of weeks. I can't wait to see you then.